December 1943, Ortona, Italy. Inside a command post 3 kilometers behind German lines, Wehrmacht officers gather around a wooden table covered with maps and reports. The oil lamp flickers as they read through intelligence documents that make no sense. The numbers are wrong. They must be wrong. For 6 months, German forces have held strong positions across Italy. Their defense lines have stopped American advances. British attacks follow predictable patterns. The Germans know how to fight them. They know when attacks will come, usually after heavy artillery fire. They know how Allied soldiers move through towns, always using streets and main roads. They know the enemy takes breaks at night to rest and regroup. But now something has changed, and the change brings fear. A major named Klaus Werner points to casualty reports from the past 3 weeks. His finger shakes slightly. German losses in sectors facing Canadian troops are 40% higher than anywhere else on the Italian front. 40%. In some battles, the number climbs to 60%. These are not small differences. These are the kinds of numbers that lose wars. The 1st Parachute Division considers itself the best Germany has. These are elite soldiers, trained for years, veterans of brutal fighting across Europe and Africa. They have stopped British tank attacks. They have held against massive American infantry assaults. But against the Canadians, their standard tactics fail completely. Defensive positions that should hold for days fall in hours. Strong points that cost the Allies hundreds of casualties to capture get overrun with barely a fight. Werner reads from a field report written 2 days earlier. A company commander describes watching Canadian soldiers advance through artillery fire that should have pinned them down. The Canadians did not stop. They did not take cover. They moved forward through the explosions as if the shells meant nothing. When they reached the German trenches, the fighting became savage. The report uses that exact word, savage. But then, when the position fell and Germans tried to surrender, the Canadians accepted immediately. They treated prisoners correctly, even kindly. They offered water and medical care. One Canadian officer spoke perfect German and apologized for the conditions of the battlefield. This combination confuses the German commanders more than anything else. How can soldiers be so ruthless in combat yet so civilized in victory? The pattern repeats in every engagement. Canadians fight like demons until the enemy surrenders, then transform into professional soldiers who follow all the rules of war. German intelligence has no framework for understanding this behavior. Their training manuals describe enemies as either barbaric or weak, disciplined or chaotic. The Canadians seem to be all of these things at once. Another officer, a colonel named Friedrich Braun, has been studying Canadian movements for 2 weeks. He spreads out photographs taken by reconnaissance planes. The images show Canadian positions at different times of day. Braun points out something strange. During daylight hours, Canadian camps look quiet, almost lazy. Soldiers rest in tents. Equipment sits idle. But every night, the camp's empty. The Canadians move out in darkness, conducting operations when German doctrine says armies should sleep. They attack at 2 in the morning. They advance at 4. By dawn, they have captured objectives and settled in to defend them, making it look like they have been there for days. Traditional German defensive strategy relies on knowing when attacks will happen. Commanders position troops based on predictable enemy schedules, but Canadians have no schedule. They strike when tired. They wait when fresh. A German defender never knows if the quiet sector he guards will explode into combat in the next 5 minutes or stay peaceful for 3 more days. This uncertainty wears down morale faster than actual combat. The intelligence reports pile up on the table. Each one describes something that should not be possible. Canadian artillery hits targets on the first shot at ranges exceeding 8 kilometers. Most armies need 3 or 4 shots to find the range. Canadian infantry clears fortified buildings in minutes using techniques no one has seen before. They blast holes through walls and move between buildings without ever stepping into the streets where machine guns wait. German snipers, positioned to cover roads and alleys, fire at empty space while Canadians advance through solid stone walls. Werner picks up a diary taken from a captured Canadian soldier. The entries describe life before the war. The soldier worked on a farm in a place called Saskatchewan. He writes about planting wheat and fixing tractors. He sounds like a simple country boy, not a trained killer. Yet this same farmer stormed 3 fortified positions in 5 days, killed at least 8 German soldiers, and carried 2 wounded comrades to safety under heavy fire. The disconnect between the peaceful farmer and the deadly soldier makes no sense to Werner. The most troubling document sits at the bottom of the pile. A German battalion commander, a veteran of the Russian front who has seen the worst fighting of the war, wrote a single paragraph before dying from wounds received near the coast. Werner reads it aloud to the room. These are not the English. They give no quarter in assault, yet offer fair terms in surrender. One cannot predict their movements. They attack when exhausted, wait when strong. Fighting them is like boxing a shadow that suddenly turns to steel. Braun closes the folder and looks at his fellow officers. The High Command has dismissed earlier warnings about Canadian troops. Senior generals called them colonials, adequate but unremarkable. Just more British Commonwealth soldiers, nothing special. But the men in this room know different. They have seen what these soldiers can do. They have counted the bodies. They have read the reports. And now they must figure out how to fight an enemy that breaks every rule they understand about warfare. The answers begin to emerge in January 1944, but they bring no comfort. As German intelligence officers study Canadian tactics with desperate attention, they realize they need to understand how these soldiers fight so they can find ways to stop them. The documents they compile read like instruction manuals for a completely new kind of warfare. Canadian units perfect what they call storm tactics. When they attack a fortified building, they do not waste time with careful approaches. They hit hard and fast, moving from room to room with brutal efficiency. German observers time these assaults in record-shocking numbers. Canadians clear defensive positions in 85 seconds per room. British units take 140 seconds. American forces need 160. The difference seems small until commanders calculate what it means across an entire battle. Faster clearing means less time for defenders to organize, call for help, or prepare surprises. It means fewer Canadian casualties and more German prisoners. The speed comes from training and teamwork that looks almost like a dance. First soldier through the door goes left, second goes right, third covers the center. Grenades fly before boots cross the threshold. Rifle fire follows instantly. The whole sequence takes less than 3 heartbeats. Germans hiding in these rooms describe feeling overwhelmed before they can even raise their weapons. The violence happens so fast that surrender becomes the only logical choice. But the truly revolutionary tactic emerges during the battle for Ortona, starting December 20th. The town sits near the Adriatic coast, a maze of stone buildings and narrow streets. German paratroopers fortify every structure, placing machine guns to cover every alley and intersection. They expect the Canadians to advance slowly, building by building, losing men to crossfire at every turn. Instead, the Canadians simply ignore the streets. Engineers use explosive charges to blast holes through the thick stone walls between buildings. Each hole measures roughly 1 meter across, just wide enough for a soldier with full equipment to squeeze through. The Canadians call it mouse-holing. They move through entire blocks without ever stepping outside. German machine gunners watch Emerau's empty streets while Canadian infantry advances behind them, appearing suddenly from directions that should be impossible. The technique transforms urban warfare. Traditional doctrine says attacking forces should advance 23 meters per hour through defended towns. The Canadians move at 23 meters per hour through solid stone walls. Their actual advance rate through Ortona averages more than 3 times faster than anyone thought possible. German defensive plans, based on normal speed calculations, become worthless overnight. The battle rages for 8 days. Stone dust fills the air so thick that soldiers can barely see 3 meters ahead. The sound of explosions echoes constantly through the narrow streets. Every blast shakes the ground. Windows shatter. Walls crack. The smell of cordite and burning wood never goes away. Canadian soldiers wrap cloth around their faces to breathe through the dust. They fight in almost total darkness inside the buildings, using flashlights and muzzle flashes to see their enemies. By December 28th, the Germans withdraw from Ortona. They leave behind 1,372 dead and wounded soldiers. Canadian casualties, total 502 men. German commanders expected to lose maybe 300 troops while inflicting 1,200 Canadian casualties. The actual numbers reverse their predictions completely. Something about Canadian methods makes defense almost impossible. Not everyone in Allied command appreciates these new tactics. General Bernard Montgomery, one of Britain's most famous commanders, reads report about Ortona with disapproval. He believes in careful, methodical warfare. Massive artillery bombardments should soften enemy positions. Infantry should advance only after defenses crumble. Tanks should support every movement. The Canadian approach seems reckless to him, unnecessarily aggressive. He writes in a memo that such methods waste lives and resources. But a Canadian general named Guy Simon sees different truths in the numbers. He compiles detailed after-action reports showing exactly how Canadian tactics save lives by ending battles quickly. A longer fight gives the enemy more time to kill your soldiers. A fast, violent assault shocks defenders into surrender before they can organize effective resistance. Simon sends his reports directly to Allied Supreme Command, bypassing Montgomery's objections. The proof arrives in February 1944 when British intelligence intercepts a German military communication. The message comes from 10th Army Command, the headquarters controlling much of the Italian front. It carries the designation Tactical Directive 447. The content stuns Allied analysts. The directive orders all German units to immediately reinforce any defensive sector where Canadian forces deploy. The reinforcement must equal 1.5 times normal troop strength. If a position usually holds with 1,000 soldiers, it now needs 1,500 when facing Canadians. The directive does not suggest this increase, it commands it. German High Command considers Canadian attacks so dangerous that they require 50% more defenders than any other Allied threat. This single document validates everything Simons has been arguing. Enemy commanders, who know their own soldiers and defenses better than anyone, officially declare Canadian forces more dangerous than equivalent American or British units. The directive becomes classified evidence that Canadian methods work exactly as intended. Canadian gunners also develop remarkable skills with artillery. Most armies need 3 or 4 shots to find their target. The first shell lands somewhere near the goal. Spotters watch where it hits and radio corrections. The second shot gets closer. The third might score a direct hit. This process takes time and wastes ammunition. Canadian artillery crews consistently hit targets with their first shell at distances beyond 8 kilometers. German troops in defensive positions learn to fear the whistle of incoming Canadian artillery because they know the first sound they hear might be the last. The guns achieve this accuracy through intensive training and mathematical precision. Canadian spotters use careful measurements and detailed maps. They account for wind speed, air temperature, and ammunition variations. They practice constantly, even when not in combat. The result is artillery fire that acts more like a sniper rifle than area bombardment. Night operations become another Canadian specialty. While other armies rest after dark, Canadians conduct 67% of their attacks between 10 at night and 4 in the morning. German soldiers stand watch in darkness, knowing attack could come at any moment but never certain when. The psychological strain breaks men faster than actual combat. Defenders grow exhausted from constant alertness. When the attack finally comes, they lack the energy and focus to fight effectively. By June 1944, the reputation of Canadian forces spreads through the German army like a disease. Soldiers whisper warnings to each other. Officers pass along intelligence briefings that single out the maple leaf insignia as a sign of extreme danger. The statistics paint a clear picture that terrifies every German commander. Defensive positions facing Canadian troops now require 3,200 additional soldiers per sector compared to positions facing other Allied forces. This is not a suggestion based on theory. This is a mathematical calculation based on actual battle results. Without those extra troops, German lines collapse an average of 8 hours faster. The numbers reveal something even more disturbing to German morale. When soldiers know they face Canadian units, surrender rates jump by 23%. These are not cowards giving up without a fight. These are experienced Wehrmacht troops who have survived years of brutal warfare. They choose to raise white flags rather than face another hour of combat against an enemy they cannot predict or stop. German situation reports begin using a new phrase that appears in no military manual. They call it the Canadian morale effect. Just knowing Canadians occupy the sector across no man's land makes German soldiers less willing to fight. Intelligence agencies on both sides produce 14 separate reports analyzing Canadian tactical patterns between January and June 1944. No other Allied nationality receives this level of attention relative to force size. German analysts study every Canadian victory, looking for patterns they can exploit. They find few weaknesses. British and American intelligence officers study the same battles to understand what makes their Canadian allies so effective. The conclusions all point to the same factors: superior training, aggressive initiative, and unpredictable timing create a combination that standard defensive doctrine cannot counter. The invasion of Normandy in June brings Canadian forces to France. Allied command assigns them critical objectives around the city of Caen. The landscape transforms into hell on earth. Tank treads churn through wheat fields that weeks earlier grew peacefully under summer sun. Each tank leaves a trail of destroyed earth 2.5 meters wide. German machine gun positions hide in old stone farmhouses with walls 80 centimeters thick. These walls stop rifle bullets and shell fragments. They should provide perfect cover for defenders. But Canadian artillery and infantry coordinate their attacks with such precision that even these massive stones crumble. The air hangs thick with the smell of cordite from constant explosions. Summer dust mixes with smoke to create a haze that burns the eyes and throat. The sound becomes a living thing that fills every moment. Lee Enfield rifles crack with sharp reports. 25-pound artillery guns boom every 45 seconds, their rhythm as regular as a heartbeat. Bren guns clatter with their distinctive mechanical sound. Between these noises, men scream, engines roar, and buildings collapse. There is no silence anywhere near the battle lines. The sound follows soldiers even when they try to sleep. It invades their dreams and haunts their waking hours. Operation Totalize begins on August 8th. The Canadians pioneer a new kind of attack that changes armored warfare forever. 720 tanks and armored vehicles advance together through the darkness. No army has ever attempted a nighttime armored assault on this scale. The ground shakes from the combined weight of so many machines moving in formation. Engines growl and treads clank. The noise alone terrifies German defenders who cannot see what approaches but know something massive comes toward them. The advance penetrates 14 kilometers into German territory in just 12 hours. Military experts consider this impossible in 1944. Defended positions should slow any attack to a crawl. But Canadian forces blow through defensive lines like they barely exist. The 12th SS Panzer Division, one of Hitler's most elite units, stands in their path. These are fanatical soldiers, trained since childhood in Nazi ideology, equipped with the best weapons Germany produces. They number 20,540 men when Operation Totalize begins. 72 hours later, only 6,000 remain combat effective. The division loses more than two-thirds of its strength in 3 days. German High Command meets in emergency session on August 15th. The minutes from this meeting survive the war and provide chilling evidence of how deeply Canadian forces worry enemy leadership. A memorandum circulates among top commanders with a priority assessment label. The document states flatly that Canadian formations represent a disproportionate threat to German defensive plans. It recommends strategic avoidance where tactically feasible. When engagement cannot be avoided, the memo demands overwhelming force ratios of at least 2.5 German soldiers for every 1 Canadian. This recommendation represents an extraordinary admission. Germany is losing the war. Resources grow scarce. Every soldier matters. Yet High Command orders commanders to concentrate forces against Canadians, even if it means weakening other sectors. They would rather face larger numbers of American or British troops than smaller numbers of Canadians. The maple leaf insignia becomes more than a national symbol. It becomes a warning that tells German soldiers to expect the worst fight of their lives. The Falaise Gap battle in late August creates scenes that soldiers remember for the rest of their lives. A narrow valley between the towns of Falaise and Trun becomes a death trap for Germany's 7th Army. Canadian artillery creates a wall of fire along a 12-kilometer front. Shells land every 20 meters in a continuous bombardment that never stops. The explosions blend together into one constant roar that makes verbal communication impossible beyond 5 meters. Soldiers must press their mouths directly against their comrades' ears and scream to be heard. Smoke from burning vehicles rises so thick it blocks out the afternoon sun. The valley falls into twilight darkness at 2 in the afternoon. Hundreds of German trucks, tanks, and cars burn simultaneously. The heat from so many fires raises the temperature to 43 degrees Celsius. Metal glows red hot. Ammunition explodes randomly as flames reach storage compartments. The smell of burning rubber, diesel fuel, and worse things fills the air. German soldiers trying to escape describe walking through hell itself. The ground shakes continuously from artillery impacts. Trees shatter. Roads disappear under cratered earth. Bodies lie everywhere. Canadian infantry advances through this nightmare wearing gas masks to filter the smoke. They move methodically, clearing pockets of resistance, closing the escape routes. They show no hesitation, despite conditions that would break most soldiers. The combination of artillery fire and infantry assault systematically destroys an entire German army. Tens of thousands of enemy soldiers die or surrender in the valley. The scale of destruction exceeds anything seen on the Western Front since 1918. A German major named Werner Pluskat survives the war and gives interviews years later. His words capture what German soldiers felt when facing Canadians. He says his army feared the Canadians more than any other enemy. Americans were predictable. British were methodical. But Canadians would not stop under any circumstances, wound them, and they advanced, cut them off, and they fought through. German soldiers called them the Maple Leaf Devils. When troops saw that maple leaf insignia, they knew to expect no mercy and to show their absolute best or die trying. The war ends in May 1945, but the legacy of the Maple Leaf Regiment continues long after the last shots are fired. Military analysts across the world begin studying what happened in Italy and France. They want to understand how one nation's soldiers achieved such remarkable results. The numbers tell a story that changes military thinking for generations. German commanders who survive the war become valuable sources of information for Allied intelligence services. The United States Army conducts extensive interviews with former Wehrmacht officers to learn from their experiences. These interviews produce thousands of pages of testimony. When analysts count references to different Allied nationalities, they discover something remarkable. German commanders mention Canadian forces 347 times in their recorded statements. This number seems small until you remember that Canada fielded far fewer troops than America or Britain. Relative to force size, Germans talk about Canadians more than any other Allied soldiers. The enemy remembers them most vividly, fears them most deeply, respects them most completely. Soviet military intelligence also takes notice. Between 1946 and 1948, Russian analysts study Canadian tactics for possible use in the Red Army. They particularly focus on night operations, combined arms coordination, and small unit initiative. The Soviets built their military on mass formations and centralized command. Canadian methods offer a different approach where individual soldiers make important decisions without waiting for orders from distant generals. This flexibility allows rapid response to changing battlefield conditions. Soviet planners recognize the value, even if it conflicts with their preferred doctrine. The techniques pioneered by Canadian forces gradually become standard practice across Western militaries. By 1952, the newly formed North Atlantic Treaty Organization adopts many Canadian innovations as official doctrine. Night assault procedures taught to NATO forces come directly from Canadian experiences in Italy. Combined arms coordination models, where infantry, armor, and artillery work together seamlessly, follow patterns established by Canadian units in Normandy. Most importantly, NATO embraces the concept of small unit initiative that made Canadians so unpredictable and effective. This last change represents a fundamental shift in military thinking. Traditional armies of the 1940s operated on rigid command structures. Generals made plans and lower ranks followed them exactly. Deviation from orders meant court-martial. But Canadians proved that soldiers on the ground often see opportunities and dangers that distant commanders miss. Giving those soldiers authority to act on their observations leads to better outcomes. A corporal who spots an undefended gap in enemy lines should not need to radio back to headquarters for permission to exploit it. He should attack immediately while the opportunity exists. This philosophy spreads through Western militaries and becomes fundamental to modern warfare. The Royal Canadian Regiment itself receives 40 battle honors for World War II service. This total exceeds any other Commonwealth regiment. Battle honors are not given lightly. Each one represents a significant military achievement officially recognized by the government and military establishment. 40 honors mean 40 separate occasions where the regiment performed with exceptional skill and courage. Yet, despite this remarkable record, most individual soldiers return to quiet lives in Canada after the war. They go back to farms and small towns. They rarely speak about their experiences. Their reputations remain strongest among those who fought against them. Colonel E.L.M. Burns commanded Canadian forces in Italy during some of the heaviest fighting. In 1947, he reflects on what made his soldiers so effective. His words capture something important about the Canadian character. He says Canadians were not fiercer than other soldiers, nor braver. They simply understood that hesitation costs more lives than decisiveness in combat. There comes a moment in every battle where you must act or die. Canadians chose to act. They paid the price of action rather than inaction. This philosophy sounds simple, but requires tremendous courage to practice. Acting means exposing yourself to danger. Waiting feels safer in the moment, even though it often leads to worse outcomes. The paradox of Canadian military effectiveness puzzles analysts for years. How did soldiers from a peaceful nation with limited military tradition become so formidable? The answer lies in an unusual combination of traits. Canadians brought Commonwealth discipline and training standards. British military tradition emphasized order, precision, and following proper procedures. But Canadians also possessed North American individualism and frontier spirit. They grew up in a culture that valued self-reliance and creative problem-solving. When these two influences merged, they created soldiers who followed orders but improvised ruthlessly within those orders. They maintained professional standards but adapted quickly to unexpected situations. They showed mercy to enemies who surrendered but displayed absolute lethality toward those who continued fighting. This unpredictability generated psychological warfare as effective as physical combat. German soldiers never knew which version of their Canadian opponents they would face. Would the Canadians attack in 5 minutes or 5 hours? Would they advance straight ahead or appear from an unexpected direction? Would they use artillery or attempt infiltration? The uncertainty wore down German morale and made defensive planning nearly impossible. Commanders could not prepare for every possibility simultaneously. Resources spent guarding one approach left others vulnerable. The stress of constant uncertainty exhausted soldiers before battles even began. Modern military doctrine embraces concepts that Canadians practiced instinctively 70 years ago. Today's armies emphasize adaptive leadership and mission command. These fancy terms describe simple ideas. Adaptive leadership means adjusting your methods based on current conditions rather than following rigid plans. Mission command means telling subordinates what you want accomplished, but letting them decide how to accomplish it. Canadian soldiers in 1943 already understood these principles without needing special training or doctrine manuals. They adapted naturally and took initiative automatically. The story of the Maple Leaf Regiment teaches important lessons about effectiveness in crisis situations. Success does not always come from following established playbooks. Sometimes the best results emerge from combining different approaches in new ways. Discipline matters, but so does flexibility. Training provides essential foundations, but initiative determines outcomes. The most dangerous opponent is not necessarily the strongest or most numerous. The most dangerous opponent combines multiple strengths in ways that create unexpected advantages. Germans did not fear Canadians because they were cruel or savage. They feared them because they were effective. In an era of industrial warfare where individual soldiers seemed interchangeable, where massive armies clashed in battles involving millions of men, the Canadians proved that culture and attitude still mattered. A well-trained unit with strong morale and tactical flexibility could achieve results far beyond what numbers alone predicted. 10,000 Canadians accomplished what might take 20,000 soldiers from other armies. The maple leaf symbol evolved beyond representing a nation. It came to represent a warrior philosophy that balanced seemingly opposite qualities. Be polite and professional until circumstances demand otherwise. When that moment arrives, commit completely without hesitation or mercy. Show restraint in victory, but absolute determination in combat. Follow rules and procedures except when those rules prevent success. This philosophy creates soldiers who are simultaneously predictable and unpredictable, disciplined and creative, civilized and deadly. Perhaps the deepest lesson is this: the most formidable opponent is not the one who acts from rage or hatred. The most formidable opponent is the one who remains calm and professional while applying overwhelming force toward clear objectives, the one who can switch instantly from restraint to violence and back again, the one who makes moral distinctions even in the chaos of battle, showing mercy when appropriate but never confusing mercy with weakness. The Wehrmacht learned this truth at tremendous cost across Italian hills and French fields. The maple leaf warned them what approached. They rarely heeded the warning in time,